Grace and peace to you in the name of God the Creator, Christ the Redeemer, and the Spirit who sustains us. Amen. It's a safe bet to say that anyone who has spent a significant portion of their life in church knows an over-functioning pastor. Maybe has been a member of a congregation that has an over-functioning pastor. You know the type. The one who has to be on all the committees, but has to chair them too, and double checks everything the administrator does, or just does it all for them, and expects to be the first call when something goes wrong in the building, and chooses the Bible study or the Sunday school curriculum, and leads every Bible study, and micromanages the altar guild. The thing is, it can be hard for a congregation to have both an over-functioning pastor and strong lay leadership. It's not impossible. Different pastors overfunction in different ways. But there are churches even today where pastors take on so much of the work that they have trained the people that unless you're a pastor, what it means to be a follower of Jesus is to show up on Sunday morning and put your offering in the plate. The pastor will literally take care of everything else. Reading our preaching text for today, it's hard to see where that attitude comes from, because Paul is basically saying you can't follow Jesus that way. We're at a time in the history of the church where things are changing. We don't know how everything will shake out. We just know that in some very real ways, church today doesn't look like church 10 years ago. And church 10 years from now will look very different from church today. Take a look around. Who isn't here who was here 10 years ago? How much smaller are most congregations than they used to be? Some of that was COVID, but I think that COVID just accelerated changes that were already occurring. Fewer people place trust in institutions such as healthcare, the government, and yes, the church, and in authority figures such as doctors, the subject matter experts that make up much of the government workforce, and even pastors. Now, some of that is probably deserved. There have been plenty of cover-ups, plenty of scandals, plenty of evidence of corruption and wrongdoing, as we've learned from as far back as Watergate in Vietnam to the decades of cover-ups and relocating abusive priests that the Catholic Church engaged in. To say nothing of the horrors of the Tuskegee experiment and other unethical medical studies. But not all of it is deserved. After all, there are more decent, trustworthy healthcare workers, government servants, and church leaders than not. And I think most reasonable people know that. Instead, I think we're at an inflection point. A point where the way the church has been for 500 years doesn't fit our needs any longer. Those of you who were here for Coffee with Counsel a couple of weeks ago heard me coming at this from a slightly different perspective when I talked about the conference gathering that I attended the last Saturday in April, when Bishop's Associate Chad Langdon shared with us that we have 143 congregations in the Central States Synod and only 101 active pastors, 3 of whom serve full-time in the Synod office and others of whom are called to be chaplains. And of those 143 congregations, somewhere around half can afford to pay their pastor full-time. Some of those congregations band together in parishes where one pastor serves 2 or 3 or 5 churches. Others are small and active like ours is, and we figure out a way to make it work. But others are dying, maybe because their pastor overfunctions. Or maybe because they have a history of over-functioning pastors and they just don't know any other way to be. Or maybe because the needs in that community have changed and they haven't figured out how to assess what their community needs from them. Or they're scared to make the needed change, and we've always done it this way drives them right into the ground. The group of Jesus followers that Paul is writing to in Philippians is having some sort of crisis. We don't know exactly what it is, but it appears to be multiple issues. There's some sort of internal conflict. There's also an external threat. A city so pro-Roman may very well have been anti-Semitic. And they're worried about Paul, who's writing to them from prison. But he's urging them to be confident in their faith, to stand together in their fear as a reminder to themselves and the outside community that God is with them in their suffering. Paul's still facing the same kind of struggles everywhere he goes. That's why he keeps getting arrested. He can't preach the gospel without rousing the rabble. After all, at least in the eyes of Rome, that's who Jesus was teaching and healing. But it isn't just about standing together in their fear and reminding themselves that God is with them in their suffering. Paul needs to ground them in the gospel, reminding them why they're all doing this in the first place. That's an important thing for us to hear too. When we look around at the state of the ELCA or the church as a whole and see declining numbers and demographics shifting older, we could use the reminder of why we're doing this in the first place, too. Because following Jesus isn't about the numbers. It's really countercultural. If we're really following Jesus, that is. We have a common purpose and a common mind. But that doesn't mean that we only go to church with people who agree with us or only go to church with people who share our interests in feeding the hungry or restoring creation or using setting 3. Instead, it means that we have a fellowship of the Spirit, a koinonia, the things that are shared in common as the basis of a partnership or a community. And he instructs them to value others over themselves, which is certainly countercultural, as it's the exact opposite of looking out for number one. But what happens if we continually value others over ourselves? Imagine what it looks like when everyone does it. It turns society on its head, and everyone is taken care of. Because this suffering for the sake of the gospel thing that Paul is talking about is not an individual call. It's a team sport. It only works when we do it together. When the community sees one person suffering, everyone rallies around them and helps them to bear their struggles. And then he reminds them of who Jesus was. Someone who was willing to give up his equality with God to become human, but not just any human. Jesus could have chosen to be incarnated as the emperor of Rome or the pharaoh of Egypt, but instead, because of God's very nature, Jesus chose to become incarnated as the poorest of the poor, a servant in a backwater of the empire. Someone who by the very nature of the body he was born into would be oppressed and mistreated, even up to and including being convicted and executed as a criminal by the state. And because Jesus was willing to bear all that, God exalted him so that we still know his name and sing his praises 2,000 years later. So he grounds them again in the incarnation and resurrection of Jesus to remind them why we're all here fighting the good fight. God is already at work. God is always at work among them, among us still today. We just need to remember that and trust in it, reflecting the gift of the salvation that we've been given through constant practice of discipleship. And then he says something that is probably the bane of every over-functioning pastor's existence. I'm not always going to be with you, so you're going to have to figure out how to do this on your own. He's clearly not with them now, and he wants to prepare them for the possibility that this work may eventually mean that he will never be with them again. And they're going to have to learn to stand on their own feet and not lean on him for moral and theological support. I had a great meeting with Bishop Donna and Bishop's associate Chad this week. After the conference gathering, I emailed them and said that I think we need to be a lot more intentional about discussing bivocational ministry, which is the word for the way I do ministry, with a foot planted here and a foot planted at the hospital. I said that I think we need to be a lot more intentional about helping candidates and even pastors discern whether they are called to bivocational ministry. And so they invited me to talk to them about it. I've discovered since I've been here that I have a real passion for bivocational ministry, and I think it's a gift to the church and a gift to congregations to have bivocational ministers. I know that strong lay leadership predates my time here, and I believe that having a part-time pastor who also has another job elsewhere leads to a laity that is more involved in all aspects of a congregation's life. And I believe that I am a better pastor because I do other work as well. And so one of the gifts that I can give to the church as a whole is my experience as a bivocational pastor. It's also a gift that I can give to my other work at the hospital as I continue to work out my salvation with fear and trembling, responding to Jesus' continual grace in my life with the practice of discipleship in all aspects of my life. I don't stop being a pastor just because I go to my other job. And I don't stop being a care management administrator just because I come here. We are all so many things. But first and foremost, we are followers of Jesus. This ancient hymn that Paul has made the center point of our text for this morning, the part that we read together, reminds us why we're here, what our common purpose and our common goal are when we are together and when we are apart. It reorients us toward Jesus as our shared center. Reminds us that Jesus' life and ministry are the model after which we pattern our own lives. And we, every last one of us, are here because God is at work in us. Even if we don't know what the future of the church will be, we know that we have been given gifts for ministry because we are in this place together with a common purpose and a common goal, a common mind. Amen.